Hello and welcome to this section of the sysadmin training course where we will now be exploring into details about Windows Server and Active Directory. So in the previous section we had set up our labs, we've installed some necessary bits, we've installed a server and we have installed a workstation, and now we want to start taking the server seriously. So in this section we want to understand what do we need to know about a server from a sysadmin point of view. What are some of the essentials that you need to be familiar with? Understanding these basic necessities about a server would go a long way to help you to answer interview questions and know how to learn on the job if you're already a tech support and you're looking to upgrade your skills. So when it comes to anything to do with a server, you need to know what a server is. For anyone who's new to this kind of topics, you need to know what a server is, and not just knowing what a server is, what it does, and how various IT environments have their way of naming services. And servers are normally named according to what they're built for, what services they render. That's a good IT support services practices. And servers normally work, since they are going to be working in a network environment, it's essential that they normally should have a proper time and date configuration so that the services can run properly. And servers, just like when we did the installation in the lab setups, you'd realize that it has a basic Windows operating system interface like Windows 10 or Windows 11. Now, those Windows, obviously, they are operating systems that rely on patches. When I say patches, security updates and features. For instance, you need to have your Windows operating system updated regularly so that there is not going to be any vulnerabilities that might attack your network or your service, hence patches. So we'd have to explore what some of that is. And then, since it's a network service, whenever you have a server which is rendering service to people in the organization, people who can connect to it and get access to some of the resources, obviously it means there has to be some sort of internal network set up so that the servers can communicate with its clients. So we'd have to understand how that what all that is about. And once we have that understood, we can set up some configs and do some test connections between servers and workstations. So let's just take these one by one and understand what am I trying to say here, from a learning point of view, and whenever you're in an interview, how you can answer questions about these specific features. So when it comes to a server, like I said, a server is a network service. A server is basically a resource that is just a basic computer system that runs certain services on it that is made available to some other users within an organization who can only access it if they have been given access to it. So it's a computer system that provides services and resources to other networks. This is a basic fundamental understanding, which is essential in the IT environment, because obviously if you have an organization with an IT environment, IT users, those IT users have computers, they have user accounts, and then you can use your user accounts to connect to services. So having a server is a central piece that is able to render this sort of management system. So you can have things like printers that can be accessed by anyone within the organization so long as they're on a network, and that is being serviced by a server. They are also designed in a way that whenever the capacity is low, it can easily be scalable. If it's a virtual environment, you can easily just create a new server and then maybe do a failover or share a load between the two servers. Some of the services that I would maybe highlight on, basically servers would be used to manage users and computers. So there will be a domain controller, and that domain controller would be the authoritative server that actually provides resources to when it comes to authentication and user management. So every organization will normally have a domain controller, and then that domain controller is used to do those various authentications and managing users and computers. Other use cases would need servers to be set up separately, in the sense that, for instance, if you have a lot of printers, you need to have a separate server that's used to manage printers. If you have an IT environment set up in such a way that every department should have their own network share, then you probably need to have a file server where you can have all people within the organization to save their documents there. And that could be managed from a separate server. You might have a server for your mailbox, for instance, if you have Exchange capabilities. If you want to use Microsoft Exchange locally on-prem, you don't want to use the online version, you can have a separate server for that. If you want to have a website that the company uses, you don't want to use some of the cloud services, you want to have your own local server to host your website, that can be provisioned separately. So you can have a whole lot of things that we would be looking at in the next slide, which is naming a server. So servers are named based on use cases. So use cases would be the derivative of what is needed or required for a service, and that could also lead to a proper naming convention for a server. So servers are normally named based on their use cases. So in an organization, you could have about 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 servers, and each server is configured to provide certain different services. And normally, as an IT system administrator, you have to follow a proper naming convention such that people can easily connect to it. People within the IT department can also manage it whenever they need. And some of the naming conventions need to be clear. You need to avoid using special characters. For instance, you have this simple diagram here that shows all the various kinds of purposes and some of the kind of names that they normally use to name the servers. So you have the domain controller, which is normally the Active Directory server. You have a web server, file server, and so many other servers with their naming conventions. So like if there's a 01, then maybe there might be a 02. Whenever probably there is a need to have two servers running the same service in case one fails, then maybe there might be a failover configured for one to switch over to the other one. Hence the naming convention probably web server 01, web server 02. If web server 01 is down, web server 02 can pick it up. So that's all to do with naming a server. The next thing we need to talk about is time and date. So normally when you set up a new server, for instance, when we install that new server, we didn't do any configurations, but we're looking at that in a sec. You normally have to make sure that the time and date on that server is accurate. If it's not accurate, other devices can't communicate to it. So for instance, if I want to connect to a server or a service that's running on a server that is backdated or the time is wrong and my time is correct, since the times are not in sync, I can't really talk to that network because we are not on the same time scale. Hence the importance of knowing what to do when it comes to time and date. Sometimes some system administrators wouldn't necessarily have to be going to their servers to manually be checking the times. What they can do is they can set up a separate time server, which is a network time protocol server that's set up to sync its time services to other servers. So that means whenever the NTP server's time is accurate, it means all the servers within the environment will have the same time. That's something easy to set up, but it's not something we would configure. But it's just something to know when it comes to interview questions, when it comes to time for servers. And the next thing we need to just basically touch on is patches. So just like Windows operating system, like Windows 10, they always have regularly updates that you need to update. If you don't have those updates installed on the server, some of the services run it might go out of date or they might become vulnerable and you can't connect to it from client to workstation kind of relationships. And from a system administrator point of view, you know, normally when you're installing updates on Windows 10 and then you have a blue screen, Windows is restarting. During that time, the machine is down. Imagine a lot of people connecting to a server so they can use its network file share. And then you wake up sometime and then you start installing patches on your server and it's stuck in that loop. From that time, all people who are trying to connect to the server wouldn't be able to connect. Hence, it's essential to know that you can only do this updates when it comes to server level at specific times, which we call downtimes or during off-peak hours. So that whenever there is any breakdown when you're doing those updates, people who need to use the services that the server provides, they would not be impacted because obviously people are not at work, people are not using the server, people are not connected to services. So you can then go ahead and do the patches. So as a sysadmin, you need to know how to go about managing patch installation during off-peak hours. So you need to have patch management strategy. Some people would say for workstations, some system administrators would say patch Tuesday or patch Friday or whatever. But for when it comes to servers, normally they'll do it during off-peak hours, maybe during the weekend. Because sometimes you run some patches and whatever services that were installed on the server to render services to clients might stop working. So you need to make sure that after you do the patch installs, every service that's on that specific server is still running, or it's not unavailable for users to access. So that's all that you need to take away from this slide with patch install. Now the next thing we need to just basically brush on is internal network configuration. So for instance, I mentioned that the server provides services to clients. So that means the servers need to be on the specific network that is similar to those clients. If they are not on the same network, they can't talk to each other. This is basic networking 101. If a server is on a specific IP range or a specific cluster of networks and there's no configuration or a bridge between whatever the workstations network are to the server, they can't talk to each other. They can't ping each other. They can't exchange zeros and ones or bytes of data over a network. So it's essential to make sure that an internal network exists in which the servers are talking to their clients or the workstations. So normally you need to make sure that that internal network you have set up in the organization is bulletproof. So for instance, if you're in a virtual environment, you need to make sure that the internal network is configured with the right subnet masks, with the right scopes, and that enable computers to talk to servers. Now, because servers are the focal point of rendering services to clients, which are workstations, which are users and computers or staff, anyone within the organization, they need to have some level of stability. So it's a good practice that all servers normally should have static IP addresses so that whenever anyone comes in the organization or whenever any new client is introduced into the environment, they can easily connect to that server. If it is a case that there's no static IPs assigned to the servers and they're dynamically assigned, that would mean that whenever a client or workstation or any need of service is needed by any of those clients are trying to connect, they wouldn't know how to connect to it because they don't know what its network path is. They don't know what IP address it is. So it's good practice to normally set static IPs for servers, particularly domain controllers and other key purposed servers. So when it comes to this, we would be exploring that in our lab. We'll create our own internal virtual network, and then we'll make sure that the server and the client or the workstations can talk to each other. And when that's set up, we can do a basic testing to make sure that the computers or the workstation or the virtual machines that we have in our environment can talk to server. So for instance, the Windows 11 instance that we installed probably should be able to talk to the server. And one best practice to do when it comes to tests and connections between two devices, if it's a server to a client relationship or if it's a client to a client relationship, is probably to use a ping tool. So you can use the ping tool using the command prompt to ping the IP address of a server. So while you're on the client, you can ping the IP address of the server to see if there's a returning packets. While you're on the server, you can also ping the workstation to see if that's returning any packets. That's one way to validate to see if workstations and servers are talking to each other. That's one way to validate the connection between the server and the workstations. Now, this is a good practice to learn and to know, and also to be able to demonstrate to whoever is interviewing you at this level. Because when you're a system administrator, obviously when you get employed, most of the configurations are already set up. They're already there. So when you walk in, you're only going to start managing things. But then whenever new things need to be introduced, whenever there's a new workstation needed to be provisioned, whenever there's a new server needed to be provisioned, then that's when you need to come in. Obviously, you're not going to just go straight in and go full on to service them or to provide them. Normally, you would have the best practice of creating a test environment where you can create those resources and make sure that they're working before you deploy them to the live environment. So when it comes to that testing phase, that's when this comes in. You need to know how to configure the internal network for those devices such that they can talk to each other, and then test them, validate them. When it works fine as you expect or as you plan, then you can push them to the live production environment. So in the next video, we are going to examine some of these things from a practical point of view, because we already have a server installed. We have a Windows 11 machine, and we just need to go ahead and configure the server using whatever we've learned from this topic. I'll see you in the next video. Thanks.